All right, guys. So right now, what I'm going to be discussing briefly is the novice COVID-19 virus. Okay, which when that virus enters your body, you develop SARS-2, sudden acute respiratory syndrome 2. Okay, so what you should know about the COVID-19 virus is that it behaves like other viruses do. It's non-living. It's very tiny, and it's got something inside that we call RNA, ribonucleic acid, which is a little bit different from DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. RNA enables the virus to replicate itself inside of our healthy cells and cause infection or cause disease, cause sudden acute respiratory syndrome, depending on where the virus wreaks its havoc. So, what you have to understand is that the COVID-19 virus can be inhaled when it's out there in the atmosphere. And once it bypasses the mucous membranes of your nares, the hair of the nares, and the cilia, and it bypasses all those safety structures, the coronavirus may actually go inside the airways and start damaging our already existing cells. So, the first thing, let's try to identify the components of the virus, just basic components. Outside of the cell, outside of the virus, you'll notice these little proteins, these little appendages that we know as proteins. And so the proteins are there because they're supposed to be the Trojan horse that allows to get the virus inside the healthy cells. We have two primary types. We have little red ones that you guys probably have heard of as the S proteins, or the spike proteins. And then you have the little green ones right here that you know as the hemagglutinin esterase protein. And so there are other proteins on the surface of the cell, of the membrane of the virus. However, these are the two main proteins that are going to enable for the virus to penetrate our already existing healthy cells. And so the spike protein serves as like the key that unlocks the actual cell membrane. And then the hemagglutinin esterase protein is the one that tends to break down the inner membrane of the DNA that allows access for the virus to replicate itself inside the cell. Something along the lines of that, right? And so that's what the RNA is for. Okay, the RNA replicates inside the cell. And let's discuss the main cells that we have inside the alveoli so we could understand what's going on with these patients and why this virus is so virulent and it causes so many issues around the world. So we have what we call pneumocyte 1. We have the pneumocyte 2. And then we have macrophages. Okay, and let me explain a little bit. So your pneumocyte 1 represents your epithelial cells that surround the inside of the membrane of the alveolar sac. And what that provides is the gas exchange. It provides semi-permeability, and it allows, on a healthy lung, for gases to move on through. So what I'm talking about is when we're breathing, when you're a healthy person, oxygen is supposed to come in, okay? And then it bypasses the membrane of the pneumocyte 1, the epithelial cell, and we have gas exchange because we find ourselves surrounding our alveoli. We have the capillary network, okay, which I'm going to draw in this particular fashion. And imagine this is a portion of the capillaries. These are blood vessels where gas exchange is going to be occurring. So your pneumocyte 1 cells, the epithelial cells, allow for this gas exchange to occur, the oxygen to go in, and the carbon dioxide to be delivered from the actual bloodstream into the alveoli, so it can be expelled, so we can breathe it out. And that's what we call gas exchange. That's what the pneumocyte 1 cells are supposed to do. Your pneumocyte 2 cells, they produce something called surfactant. And so surfactant is a substance that prevents the surface tension from increasing within our lungs. What that means is that it prevents our alveoli from sticking to one another, because inside the alveoli there's fluid in the sense of tiny, tiny little water molecules that allow for the integrity of the inside of the alveoli to be the right temperature, the right moisture, and things like that. But what does water do? Water sometimes becomes hydrophilic and it likes to stick together. So the lungs, as they're expanding and recoiling, without that surfactant, the alveoli would stay closed off. But that substance that I'm referring to that are produced by the pneumocyte 2 cells is surfactant, and that decreases the water tension, which allows the alveoli to expand and recoil with no issue, so there's adequate gas exchange. The third type of cells that we have inside the alveoli are known as macrophages. And macro means big, phage means to eat. So they're big eaters. And what they do is they essentially engulf any cellular debris or any pathogens that are small enough for the macrophages to consume. And anytime that we have any foreign substances that enter the alveoli sac, that means that they bypass the first line of defense, which is part of our innate immune system. I'm talking about the mucous membranes, I'm talking about the cilium, I'm talking about the hairs in our nares that are supposed to trap these microorganisms and expel them. This is why sometimes when we're out in nature and we have a lot of dust and particles around, we start sneezing because those particles are entering our airway and our innate immune system is doing its job. It's bringing it back up and it's triggering the cough reflex, the sneeze reflex, and it causes lacrimation of the eyes because we want to provide more lubrication to expel all that stuff out. Now, back to the COVID-19 virus. When that virus bypasses all of those defenses, it enters our alveoli. And this creates a significant little problem because the virus, when it's very numerous, it's going to be penetrating our healthy cells. And once it enters our healthy cells, we have the transcription, the translation of RNA, meaning the duplication of the genetic material that this virus contains that's going to make our cells become defective. And so our pneumocyte cells that are supposed to provide for adequate gas exchange, adequate semi-permeability, that ability is now dysfunctional. And what ends up happening is you have other elements that are not supposed to be bypassing that membrane of the alveoli, such as fluids, plasma from the blood capillaries. It starts spilling inside the alveolar sacs, and that causes pulmonary congestion. Fluid, no longer in the small particles, but in the larger size, which impairs the gas exchange. At the same time, anytime you have a foreign substance entering your system, we call the body's immune system's antigen-antibody response. It creates something called cytokines, and cytokines attract more white blood cells. It attracts more fluid because anytime you have an infection or something that's entered your body, something that's foreign that enters your body, your immune system starts doing its thing. And it starts sending all the macrophages, it starts sending all the white blood cells, it starts sending all the plasma and red blood cells to the area so it can fight off this foreign invader. So what ends up happening in COVID-19, because it's highly virulent, it's highly aggressive, is that it starts causing all of this fluid that's not supposed to be inside the alveolar sac. It's supposed to stay, the plasma is supposed to stay within the capillary network. All of that stuff starts spilling into the alveolar sac, okay? Which now starts impairing gas exchange. At the same time, you have a lot of cellular debris that's a lot of cells that are malfunctioning. When your healthy cells are being produced, they produce adequate cells with a strong morphology, a strong physical characteristic. But now, because of this virus, every time your cells are duplicating and dividing and producing more healthy cells, they're defective. So you have a bunch of cells that are being produced, like your pneumocyte 1 cells, let's say your epithelial cells that are supposed to provide adequate gas exchange, and now it's not doing its job because it's infected with this virus. As the inflammatory response continues, you have vasodilation that occurs, which creates an opening of the blood vessel capillary wall, which allows for more plasma, more water to enter the alveolar sac, and this causes congestion, and this is why your patients that develop COVID-19 virus, they develop severe acute respiratory syndrome because the patient cannot have appropriate gas exchange. And this is why sometimes the patients were requiring to be on a ventilator because they needed supplemental oxygen, supplemental utilization of force to help that gas exchange. Now, that's what happens when the SARS virus affects the respiratory system. But sometimes when the conditions are right, when the patient has other underlying medical issues. Well, now that virus now spills into the circulatory system, and when the viral load is high enough and the patient's susceptibilities are there, meaning that they have other conditions that decreases their immunological defenses, well then that ability of the coronavirus of making your alveoli defective, well now it spreads to the systemic circulation and it starts going to your liver. It starts going to your lungs. It starts going to your kidneys. It starts going to your GI tract. It starts going to your brain. And this is what happens with COVID-19. And this is why we have a lot of issues and a high mortality rate, because the virus tends to be highly aggressive, highly virulent. We say that the virulency of the virus is very high. And that's, in a nutshell, what happens in COVID-19, guys. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel, Learn NCLEX Now. Follow me on Instagram, nclex.solved. And please visit my TikTok channel at Misael at learnnCLEXNow.com. Thank you very much.